Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to this movie about starter motors. I've got 3 starter motors right here on my workbench, and I've got a new brush holder with brushes. This is a starter motor that I pulled from my BMW 740 a few days ago. This is a starter motor that I put back in. I had 2 of them. One is on the BMW now, one is right here, rebuilt and ready. This is a different starter motor from my wife's Jaguar. I'm going to go into that in a minute. And this is the brush holder. Reason why I show you a brush holder: whatever you do on a starter motor, if it's done more than, let's say, 50,000 kilometers, you should always replace the entire brush holder with brushes. You'll get new brushes, you have new wiring, and you have a new wire going to the outside. This is a, I think, 1.8 kilowatt starter motor, so its brother is the same. It was working fine, so we're going to bench test it. Then we're going to bench test the new one so you can hear and see the difference. And the reason why I have that Jaguar starter motor here is, this is what I call a straight starter with a solenoid on the side. That means that here we have the solenoid and the bridge. The solenoid actually puts the wheel into your starter wheel, and the solenoid bridges the power to the power that powers the wire here that powers the motor. The motor is in here. Your planetary gearbox is right in here, and what happens is that a certain motor RPM is being turned into a lower RPM by the gearbox, and so the torque that the gearbox puts on the wheel right here increases, and that makes this wheel able to turn your entire engine, because your starter motor in the beginning has to overcome the vacuum and the pressure in the cylinders. Same goes for this, since it's its brother, and this is a different starter motor. Reason why it's different: right here we have the solenoid that pushes the wheel towards your starter, and right here we have the motor. Instead of having the solenoid on the side and the motor, we now have the solenoid in line with the wheel and the motor on the side. So right here they have a parallel gearbox, so we have a gear over here, we have a gear over there, and then we have a gear over here, to reduce the motor speed into the desired output speed with the corresponding torque. It doesn't really matter for your rebuild. If you have good all-round wrenching skills, you can rebuild either this one or that one, but it's just a little bit different. I would say that the vast majority of starters that we see in automotive applications since the 80s are the straight starter type, where you have the motor in line with the wheel. I do know that Jaguar, Land Rover and some other manufacturers in that area have used this Denso type of starter. I have also seen them on tractors and farm equipment. Right, so that's the introduction. To get a little bit deeper in that brush holder, why do I recommend you always replace your brush holder on any starter work, unless you really know your starter is new? This wire is exposed to the elements under the car. Usually this wire is in good shape because the starter motor is always a bit up high and in dry circumstances, but this wire could be completely corroded or damaged and somehow not transmit the current well enough. Another reason is that these are the brushes, and these brushes wear in. You will see that on the old starter the brushes will have worn, let's say halfway, and right here you have 4 new brushes that are all the way brand new. The brush holder itself, or the final argument, is like, what, 5 to 10 euros? So if you just want to freshen up your starter motor and you know your solenoid is good and you know your motor is good, with a new brush holder and brushes you basically freshened up your starter motor. Right now I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to put my vise on my workbench, going to put a battery, and we're going to bench test that starter, and then we're going to bench test that starter, so you can hear the difference between 300,000 kilometers old and about 300,000 kilometers old but rebuilt. I'm going to put that starter away. We're going to do that in another movie. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, second part, the bench test. We have the old starter on the left in the vise. We have the repaired starter here on the right in the vise. I've got my battery negative right here in the mounting hole of the starter. We're going to do that on that starter too once we test that starter. And what we're going to do now, first we're going to see if the solenoid clicks. And we do so by using that terminal and put 12 volts on that terminal. That will make just the solenoid click, because we haven't put any 12 volts right there. Let's see what happens. You can hear the solenoid click, so this solenoid is okay. It's snappy, it's fast. I would reuse this solenoid, no problem. Now normally you have your battery plus right here. And then what happens is, the moment you click with your solenoid, your battery plus is being bridged towards your motor and your motor starts spinning. So now I'm going to put my battery plus on here, and I'll be back, and then I'll apply the 12 volts again, and you'll hear the starter motor click and you'll hear it turn spin. And now you'll hear what a starter motor sounds like after about, let's say, 300,000. Okay, so we're back, got that starter motor off, just have that repaired starter motor now. Got the negative again in that bolt hole. Let's see how snappy this new solenoid is. Real snappy, that's a good solenoid. Now I'm going to hook up the plus, I'll be back in a second. Okay, let's make it spin. Although the old starter wasn't bad at all, this one's a bit more aggressive. Okay, back on the workbench. I'm going to use a towel because starter motors are always really dirty. This is, let's see, 7mm right here and right there. They actually hold the entire motor and stator to that housing. There we go. We need to get rid of these two Phillips screws because they actually hold the brush holder on that backing plate. Let me get a suitable screwdriver. Let me put some fish oil on them first. I got myself a cup in which I can hold all of the screws. This is the second screw that's coming off. Sorry, where did it go? So this cap should come off. You should be able to pull it off, but it could be a bit stuck. Okay, we'll check that out once we take that cap off. We're going to remove that 13mm one. That will get us our wire out. Gonna put my tools out of the way. Right, so the two long ones are out, the small screws are out. I've got my my wire loose. I already undone those bolts, but we'll get to that in a minute. And now we can pull the entire yoke or the entire stator off. So let's do it like this. You see that the planetary gear set wants to come out too, but let's leave it over there for now. Here you see my rotor. We'll get to that in a minute. Now let's disassemble the front. You see 3 Phillips screws right here. We got to get rid of those. Right, and here's our solenoid along with that lever and with the starter gear. Let's put that away. There's not much more right here on this housing. I'm going to put this housing away. We're going to clean, lightly pearl blast this and paint it, but we don't need to use this housing anymore. The only thing interesting about the housing is the bushing right here. You need to scotch brite it a bit, see if it's nice. If you see scratches or wear or faded marks, you should put in a new bushing. So we're going to put those 3 screws back. We're going to put my screwdriver away. Now let's see, we've got the stator with the shaft, and let's take that apart. I shouldn't call it stator actually, they call it a yoke, but whatever. And I gotta pull this rubber with it, this little rubber here, but the problem is because of all that paint, it's kind of sticky, so I kind of need to cut that away. There we go. There we go. Right here, you see that I'm gonna pull all of it in one piece. Okay, with everything dismantled, let's go over the parts. Here we have the rotor, and this is a DC rotor, which means that of this commutator, one string over here is connected through the winding with another string down there. And that means a brush is able to put a current through that rotor. We want to inspect this rotor for any strange wear, for any copper that becomes visible, because that will mean the insulation failed. You want to see clean lamination over here. You see these cut grooves. I think they do it to balance this rotor, I'm not sure. You want the teeth to be in nice shape. You don't want them to be too sharp and worn. You don't want them to be blunt, broken or cracked, whatever. And the surface over here runs in a sleeve bearing, so we don't want to see anything strange on this surface, because that would indicate bearing damage or some kind of wear. And to prepare the rotor, we'll do this in the next phase. We're just going to sand the commutator right here, measure the beginning, the end and the middle part, and that way we are able to see if there is a curve and if this commutator has a lot of wear. Now, the shaft end over here runs in the sleeve bearing that you see right here of that cap that's on the rear of the stator housing. You want to clean this sleeve bearing. You want to use Scotch-Brite or very friendly sandpaper. You don't want to rough it up, and you want to inspect that sleeve bearing. If you think it's worn, if you think it's bad, just push it out, put a new one in. Next part that we have actually here is the stator or the yoke. This is basically a metal drum with magnets in them on clips, and these are permanent magnets. I can feel that with my screwdriver, so I just want to check if they're all still pretty much the same. Now this is just an indication, this is not a real measurement, but if you would feel that one magnet is clearly less magnetic, that will be an indication that your starter motor is not performing well, and you'd have to get a new yoke or get a new magnet. There's not much that we do here. The only thing we do is take a lot of brake cleaner from the top and we just spray it in, so all the carbon and all the dirt falls down below. We put it down below, and we can use compressed air to get it and a cloth to get it out. That's the only thing I do with those stators or yokes. Right here we have the new brush holder. I actually lost the old brush holder. I don't know how, because I always keep the parts together, but whatever. Here is the new brush holder. If you want to reuse your brush holder, at your own risk, I guess, because they're really cheap and you can get them pretty much everywhere because they're pretty universal. But you want to check that the wire over here is still okay and isn't, for example, rusting away over here, because this wire has to carry all the starting current. You want to make sure all the soldering is okay, and you want to see a lot of brush material. And this ring will help us putting the new brush holder on the rotor. Right here we have the solenoid and lever assembly. I still kept it in one piece. Now we already verified that the solenoid is okay. Here we have the planetary gear set that we're going to clean, and here we have the starter clutch. Now to get this part off, it depends on the type of starter that you have, but in this case, as you can see, there is a plastic notch that has this lever held in place. So we're just going to get that lever out of here manually like that, and on the bottom same thing, and there we go. We're just gonna clean this. We're not gonna do anything special. Maybe a very little bit of grease here and here because they're moving parts, but nothing excessive. This is basically the most interesting mechanical part aside from the motor itself. This is the starter clutch. Here you are driving your starter wheel. Right here is your planetary set where your high RPM is being turned into a low but high torque RPM. In between you have spring action right here. Here you see the spring action, and here you have a gear over which this the final piece of the starter runs. This shaft piece is in a sleeve bearing, which we'll get to in a second. So you want this shaft piece to be perfectly clean with a nice surface. You want to make sure the spring is okay, so just feel the spring action. You don't want to see any rust on the spring, because that means the spring is going to rust through and break at some point. You can clean it with brake cleaner, inspect it, but then you need to re-grease it a little bit. And you also want that teeth to be okay, but basically this barely wears. So you can clean it, put some bearing grease on it, and then just move it back and forth for the grease to get everywhere. And this part basically needs to be dismantled. We'll do that in a minute, because that's the only job basically left. We want everything clean, we want to re-grease, we want it back in. I recommend against using brake cleaner on your planetary gear set. Why? This is rubber. And that white you see here is polymer, and if you use brake cleaner on it, you will actually degrade the part and make them brittle. So I recommend you just use a cloth like this with, for example, WD-40, and you clean it in a more passive way. The final part that we have is the actual metal housing on the front of the starter. You can see actually now when we put this clutch and shaft assembly in, how it sits in the sleeve bearing right there up front. So as with the other two sleeve bearings, we want to use Scotch-Brite and clean the surface and see how far worn it is. Other than that, this is a pretty dull part with no function. I'm gonna pearl blast this, and I'm gonna put a nice silver coat on it, but this is absolutely not necessary, as this part is always dry near a warm engine. So if you're in a hurry and you would see the starter like this and you just have a new brush set, you can just clean it and put it back together. Right, so with the starter clutch as our first part, manually you just take out those rubber plugs that hold everything together. You take out that gear, you take the 3 gears off. Sometimes you cannot take them off, sometimes you can. Let's see. No, in this case they are stuck on. That's okay though, we're going to put this away. Cleaning the sun gear is pretty easy. We just use a rag, we clean the sun gear. Depending on how much grease we see, we may want to get some of that grease out with a flathead. So let me just take that grease out. I'm going to speed up the movie because this is pretty obvious and pretty simple work. There we go, pretty clean. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to re-grease it anyway. We want this area to be nice and clean. I want the old grease combined with old carbon deposits gone. As I said before, I use fish oil instead of brake cleaner because of the polymer parts that are around here. Now we want to spin this and see that it's absolutely clean. We don't want to feel anything when we spin this, no grinding or anything. Now we want to spin the gears. And they are fine over their bushings. If you hear any grinding, you need to do some extra work, because grinding means that you're going to damage the parts when running. Now we're going to check the spring action. I've got good spring action. I don't see any wear on the spring. As I said before, if there would be rust on that spring because the starter has been laying around for a while, you would want to replace the starter clutch or verify that your spring is still good. Because if the spring breaks while you have the starter on the car, you're in for trouble. Okay, spring area is clean. Now I want to clean that gear a little bit. This is absolutely, if you're in an emergency job, this is not really necessary, but it's just to get a nice end result. There we go. Moves really smooth. Got those 3 rubber plugs that we're going to clean for a little bit. There we go. Alright, so the next part is putting that ring gear back in place with those rubber stops. And if you look closely, you see that there are notches on the rubber stops. And those notches are right there. So that's how we need to put this back. There we go. Spins nice, but it needs some grease now. I'm going to put an excessive amount of grease in here to make sure I've got every corner. And then I'm going to spin it and I'm going to remove all excess grease that I put in myself. This is a very rudimentary way of doing this. But if you look at my YouTube channel, you see everything is in what I call a backyard fashion. Meaning that I need to do everything in a certain way that if you have limited tools and limited substances, you can still get your stuff repaired. So there you go, I filled it up with grease. So now we just want to spin it. That grease is now getting everywhere on the teeth. And because I did an excess amount of grease, the grease is also being pushed outward. And that's what I want to see. That's enough. I take my rag again. I take all excess grease from the ring gear that you see here. Spin it again. And now I see that the top edge of the ring gear that wasn't being used is no longer receiving any grease. So that means I do not have an excess amount of grease anymore. Spins nice, sits nice on the shaft, spring action is nice, shaft action is nice, shaft end is nice. This one's finished. Okay, next let's do a simple one. We've got this yoke that we want to clean, so I'm going to put the yoke on the table just like that. I'm going to put my grease and my screwdriver away, and the outside is clean already. You just use a rag. I'm going to get my brake cleaner out. When I use a tiny little bit of brake cleaner, especially in the open air, I don't bother, but since I'm going to use a lot, I'm going to put up my mask. I need some time for that brake cleaner to get out of the air. Alright, I gave the brake cleaner a minute or so to get out of the air. I am now looking at a very nice and clean yoke. Not sure if you can see it, but it's absolutely nicely clean. Now I already checked the magnets, but let's check them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry, 6. That's six magnets and they all feel pretty much the same. We're done with the yoke. Next up is that backing plate. Just gonna clean it with a rag first. Look at what we got. Now I'm gonna try and fit the rag through the bearing. Let me use a screwdriver for this. That's a nice bearing. I'm not sure if I can make it visible. There you go, look at the bearing. You don't see any scratches, you don't see any faded areas like you would see on worn engine bearings. So if you're in a hurry job or in a backyard job and you just want a cheap starter, you can just reuse this bearing. Now, I'm going to spray paint this, but just for now I'll show you how I clean this bearing. Same deal. I want to clean the surface a little bit. I want to get my rag in. See the bearing right here, same shit. No deep scratching, no faded surfaces. I'd reuse this bearing. Alright, next part we had that little rubber buffer. Just gonna put a towel over it because it's rubber. There you go. Finished. Since we're replacing the brush holder, that does not need attention. Now we have the shaft. First thing we're gonna do with the rag is clean the gear. Clean the other side, clean the commutator. That will not help much, but let's do it anyway. You can see that it's already becoming a bit more coppery. Now I take Scotch-Brite, which is like sanding for only like a little bit. Put the Scotch-Brite over the commutator and just spin the shaft in my hands. And there we have our commutator freshened up. I'm not going to say we approve of this commutator yet. The only thing I'm going to say is this way we can get our commutator back to life. There you go. Okay, now I want to use a box cutter, and with that box cutter I want to clean every groove of the commutator to see if there is still carbon in it. But usually, if you've already been doing a great job on cleaning the starter motor, you'll see that the commutator grooves are clean. Pretty okay. We're gonna go with this. Now I got to measure that commutator. As I said before, I'm gonna take out my cheap supermarket brand digital caliper. Okay, so with my caliper, I'm gonna put my caliper on 0. We measure the commutator at the start where we do not use it, and I measure 32.28. Now we're gonna measure at the end where we do not use commutator material either. 32.2, and this was 32.3, and now we're going to measure in the middle, and that's 32.26, and let's measure again, 32.29. So we barely have any commutator wear, and if I look at the commutator with my eyes, and of course this is not a real scientific method, I do not see any curving or wear. Let me show you on the camera. Let's say this commutator was badly worn. You'd see a curve like this where your brushes have been running into the commutator. But we don't see that, so this commutator is okay. Let me just clean it again. And this rotor is ready to use again. Alright. Solenoid with the lever. There's not much I'm going to do here because we already proved that the solenoid works. I'm just going to put some grease on the joints. Although it's not even metal, but it's polymer, I still want it to be greased a bit. Same with this one. There we go. Now we want to feel that this has smooth, lubricated action. We don't want to feel it grind. This is smooth, so that's ready to reuse. Let me put my caliper away, gotta keep that clean. And with that lever and solenoid done, we basically are ready to put our starter back together. Welcome to the final part of the movie. It's been a day since the previous part. Only thing I did is pearl blast and spray paint the housing nice and silver with some clear coat on it to make it shine a little bit. I actually used a piece of fuel hose right here in the bushing to protect the bushing from the pearl blasting and from the spray paint. This is an easy trick, and as you can see the bushing is still 100% okay. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to remove these dummy bolts, these duds. I use them to protect the thread because I don't want the thread to fill up with paint. After which we will start assembling the starter motor. Alright, let's put everything in a manageable position. Let's see, we could do this the other way around like we did before. And first thing we're going to do is put the lever and the shaft in place. And since the shaft end runs in that sleeve bearing, I want to put a little bit of grease on that shaft end. You will push out any excess grease anyway, so don't worry about that. And we also need to fix the lever right now to the notches that you see here, so it goes in as one piece. So we take the lever arm, we put the lever arm around the notches, there we go. We are going to put that solenoid on, let me see. It would not be a problem if we mess up on the solenoid position now, because we can change that afterward. And this is how it's supposed to go in. Remember, I lubricated those joints. We want this guy to stick in. And now before we finish this, we're going to take that rubber buffer stop and we're going to put that in. And this also shows us in the next phase how we need to position that yoke. That rubber buffer can go in only one way. You can see the circle and the notch right here. There we go. Solenoid is in. And now we want this shaft and the gear set to go in. You can see that the shaft moved in. Now we want to take those 3 bolts that we had through the solenoid and we want to put some tension on them. Just to keep everything in place. We don't want to go crazy on this yet. There we go. Got some tension on this. This will stay in place. That will stay in place. Now, there's only one way to get the yoke in, because the back of the yoke is where you have your cable running. And you see here you have a groove on the yoke which goes over the plastic buffer. So the yoke has to go in this way. I'm going to put the starter motor on top. Gonna put the yoke on. Now I see what I'm doing. There you go. And we cannot fix the yoke yet because the back plate is also being held by the yoke. So now we're going to put the starter motor down for a second. Gonna take my shaft and grease it up a little on that gear. Although the planetary gear set already has plenty of grease, I just want to make sure we're going to have a nice result. Any excess grease, you can wipe it out with a cloth like you saw me doing before. But if there is any excess grease, you do not need to worry. It's just going to be in the free area around that planetary gear set. And now we're going to drop in the rotor. There we go. You're going to feel when your rotor sits. And you check the functioning of the rotor by looking at the starter bendix, which I just did. And we're going to get this in. We're going to get this in with the screws, but because of the paint thickness, it gives us some resistance. Next step is we take our new brush holder, and I actually want to stop using gloves now, because everything I put in now, except for that final bearing, is basically dry, and I don't want any grease on my commutator and on my copper. So, I'm going to put this together, see if I can exert some more force now. Yeah, that's going to sit nicely. Gonna take my old my new commutator. Sorry, you can see that this sits in only one way because you want that rubber to sit properly. You now also see why we have that plastic tube in the middle, because as I work my way down with that brush, that plastic tube actually keeps the brushes in position, because once the brushes jump out, it's going to be very annoying to get them around that commutator. There we go. Want to make sure this rubber is going to grab. We took care of that. Okay. Next part is we're going to put the cap back right here. For this I will need a little bit of grease because of the sleeve bearing. So with the tip of my finger I'm just going to lubricate the shaft end a little bit. There we go. And for added good measure I'll also put some grease in the bearing itself. And just spin it a little bit so I'm sure the grease got everywhere. As you can see, excess grease will be pushed out, so don't worry too much about that. This cap can also only sit in one way because you want that notch on the cap to line up with the rubber. There you go. And this, when you look inside the holes, you will now see how you can get that brush holder fixed to your cap, for which we have 2 very small screws. Before I put the cap back on, we need to fix that guy in position. I need to use a flathead, get my shaft out a little bit. There you go. Spacer ring, lock ring to keep the shaft in position. There right, so what did I just do? There is a certain position where you want that rotor to be compared to the yoke, but the rotor could move a little bit in the gears. So what they did is, you first put a spacer ring on and then you put a clip ring on this cap, and this cap is going to be fixed to the yoke, and that ensures that your rotor always has the right position. And you saw that as I was putting this cap on, excess grease was being pushed out. So there's not going to be any excess grease over there. I kept my commutator clean and I kept my brushes clean, so that's good. Let's see, there was also a dust ring that goes first, before the cap goes over. There you go. And now, hoping, yes, I actually see the threads of the new brush holder, so I have that aligned. I had those screws at the ready over here. Let me see, no, that's not them. And then when one grabs, we immediately swap to the other one and make sure they both grab before we torque them down. That one's okay. Don't want to over torque this, it's just to keep the brush holder in place, and they do their job really well with just normal torque. That one's good too. Let me see, now I want those two guys to sit. There we go. Right, now I want those 3 screws of my solenoid to be nicely torqued down. And I've put some grease behind them to make sure they don't rust shut again, because that's what those screws always do. There you go. Final part we need to do is we got to connect the wire right here to its terminal. There we go. And now we got to use the, I have it somewhere over here. There we go. Right, let's look at what we have. This is basically the starter ready to go. You saw me putting that 30mm nut on it as final touch. We got the old solenoid that we're reusing. We lubricated the joints over here. We lubricated the sleeve bearing. We lubricated the gear set. We cleaned the commutator. We lubricated the sleeve bearing over here. Put a new brush holder. That's basically all we did. And I gave it a nice paint job for added good measure. Let me clean the housing a little bit. I'm going to go over to my test bench to put current on the starter motor, and let's see what it does, and let's compare it with how it ran. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, starter motor back on the bench. Let's test solenoid action first. Fine, be back in a second. Sounds good. Hope you liked the movie. Hope this helps you repair your starter motor. If you got any questions or any requests on certain parts, let me know. See you in the next movie.